Okay, I will go ahead and share my screen. And is that showing correctly in presenter mode? Great. Okay, well, thank you. So I'm here today to talk with you a little bit about some of the expertise and capacity that we're planning to bring in as part of this FMP development process, as well as an overview of the overall approach and timeline, particularly looking at this first section of the timeline that we're operating on. So I'm sure you've seen this slide before, but just to kind of remind us where we are in the process, the context for this FMP is sort of, we're in an iterative process. You can see at the top, there are federal and state laws that exist and apply to all stages of this process. The second stage underneath that is the strategic strategic stage, where policies are developed that define the basic operating philosophies. So this would include the land board vision, the ESRF research proposal, and the HCP. And then today, what I'm here to talk about is this FMP forest management plan, or tactical stage, where we're going to be really determining how to implement the policies that have been worked on in the strategic stage. Okay, and as I said, this is an iterative process. So, the research program, the goal there is to integrate conservation goals, our research goals for things like climate resilience, ecosystem functions, and social benefits to humans and society. This long-term research is happening at a landscape scale that is adaptive, dynamic, and flexible. So the FMP that we're working on developing now is really looking at how to implement all of that in a way that puts research first, but also incorporates the other public values that we have for this forest, including education, recreation, conservation, and the local economy. So once again, the Elliott State Research Forest research plan and the FMP are one and the same. The FMP is really designed to show how we're going to implement the research program that's been put together in that proposal, and create a roadmap for how we're going to put that into action. So first today, I wanted to talk a little bit about capacity and expertise that we're bringing in throughout this process. So I'm going to dive a little bit more into each one of these in a minute, but just wanted to kind of give an overview of where we're going. So with this FMP planning process, we have a core FMP team at OSU, and that includes me. I just came in recently as the program director for the Elliott State Research Forest. So my responsibility is really for leading the FMP process along with other members of our team, engaging external collaborators, stakeholders, researchers, and the public. And then other members of that team are Katie Kavanaugh, OSU College of Forestry Associate Dean for Research, and Anna Magnuson, who's our project coordinator for the Elliott. Next on this list, you'll see the Research Plan Implementation Committee. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this committee in a minute, but it will be made up of people from both the College of Forestry and others outside of the college and the university. Next on this list, you'll see Research Forest Managers and Directors Advisory Committee. This is a group that's already been engaged earlier in the process, and we are going to be meeting again with them soon, and their expertise is also going to be brought in throughout this development process. We'll be putting out an RFP for forest management expertise, specifically working in the Coast Range, and we're prioritizing the step. So we are developing the RFP simultaneously as we fully outline all of the needed expertise and operational capacity for each piece of the FMP development process. And then once we complete that step, we'll be ready to release the RFP. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the types of experience that we'll be looking for, and would really appreciate some feedback from this group as well today, and as well as we continue forward on any skills or expertise that you think would be important that we include in this RFP. We'll also be bringing in postdocs and graduate students who will work on specific pieces of the FMP based on their area of expertise. Of course, this FMP working group continuously incorporating feedback and input from this committee throughout the development process, and then bringing in additional internal and external expertise as needed. And I'm sure as we continue throughout this development process, we will see areas where we need to bring in additional folks and additional types of expertise. And so we'll be identifying that as we move forward as well.
Hey, Shannon, before you go on with that, can I check just briefly? We had somebody join by phone. I wondered if we could know who that was. It was a 541 number.
It's Barb Shamit.
Okay, thanks, Barb.
Thank you.
Great. You can go on.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Okay, so looking a little bit more closely at the Research Plan Implementation Committee, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but this is just sort of to give you an overview of the types of expertise that we're hoping to bring together on this committee. And they would be advising on specific pieces of the FMP as we move forward with data collection, with outlining specific sections, and working on analysis and synthesis. And so the types of expertise very broadly that we're planning to bring together on this committee are landscape ecology, silvicultural systems, including ecological silviculture, intensive silviculture and restoration, human systems, looking at policy and economics, as well as social sciences, connections between humans and nature, experimental design, harvest systems, modeling, and we'll talk a little bit more about modeling today as well. Some expertise on conservation, including fish and wildlife, carbon and global change, and data, including spatial data, modeling, remote sensing, which again, we'll talk about a little bit more today, as well as how we're going to create the system for data and document repository, the framework for that. So again, would welcome any input and feedback on this Research Plan Implementation Committee. You can see there's quite a bit of broad expertise here, and it's always a balancing act between creating a committee that's small enough to function well, but also incorporating all of this expertise.
This group is well familiar with that.
I'm sure. So another group that we're working with is the Research Forest Managers and Directors Advisory Committee. So this is a group, as I mentioned, that has been brought into the conversation before. We're working on scheduling another meeting with them coming up in November. Many of these people do work for other research forests or forests that are operating on a similar scale, or bringing in a similar sort of research and harvest system that we would plan to have. So you can see representation here from Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, several people from University of Washington, from the Olympic Natural Resources Center, and from the Pac Forest, Washington Department of Natural Resources, Consulting Forestry, the Nature Conservancy, the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest here in Oregon, UC Berkeley Forest down in California, and then the Bureau of Land Management. So we're going to be continuing to work with this group, incorporating their feedback on our ideas throughout the process, and of course, then reflecting that back to this committee. So looking a little bit more closely at the RFP that we're putting together, this is going to be for a consultant or consultants with experience in Coast Range silviculture and forest management. And the goal here is to bring in practical perspectives from people who have experience working on the ground in the Coast Range on strategy, the feasibility of what we're planning to do, and logistics. So what are the challenges and opportunities for implementing the research plan? What are the factors that we need to be taking into account to build resilience long-term in the FMP for management under our stated research program goals? And what are some areas that we need to be paying attention to? So the scope of work within the FMP, as we're outlining it now, may include silviculture, so looking at ecological silviculture, intensive silviculture, and restoration systems, and how you would implement some of the practices that we're talking about in service of the research program. Research planning and implementation, so working with our researchers and other committees on the experimental design. For example, how would you design some of the thinnings that we would need to do on the forest in order to implement the research program? This could include deciding on what triggers we have for where we thin down to, what density, how would the marketing work, and what are the marketing channels for that part of Oregon, and as well as plugging into some of the experimentation design that will move forward as part of this FMP process. Another piece would be working with us on the adaptive management strategy. So how would the strategy be implemented, and setting triggers for how we would do that based on the ecology of the forest, and working in the Coast Range. Looking at a revenue generation strategy. So all of the forest management and any harvest systems would happen in service of the research program. And so based on those constraints, what can we expect from a revenue generation standpoint? What types of flexibility might we need to have in place based on the markets and how that would fluctuate from year to year? What other revenue generation strategies could we make sure that we have in place on the forest that will support the research program and the long-term sustainability and viability of that program and the forest? We would also want their expertise on responding to natural disturbances, as well as the monitoring plans. And I'll talk a little bit more about the monitoring plans later this morning, but those will be developed in tandem with our experimental designs in this FMP process. So having some feedback there would be really important from people who have that experience working on the ground in the Coast Range. And we did want to invite input, advice, feedback on some of the key qualities this group would hope to see in this RFP for forest management expertise. So if it's okay with you, Peter, I'd like to open it up to the group at this time for any questions at all on this process, but then specifically on the RFP.
Yeah, absolutely, please. Paul, you look like you were going to say something, and then Ken.
I was struggling with my mouse. Yeah, going way back to your original slide, two points. Research first. I would offer up that the research can't happen unless everything else happens. So it's a research forest, but they all need to come together. Or we won't have anything to research. The question I have is, you've got a project coordinator, a project manager, a research manager, and eventually we're going to have a forest manager. Who's in charge? Who's running the forest? I mean, you've got four managers, and I don't understand the purpose or how they fit or what the hierarchy is.
That's a great question, Paul. And I think, so in the research proposal, there was an initial organizational chart that kind of showed how all of these different people would be working together. I know that as as this idea of a public entity who would own the forest separate from OSU running the research and management program has come together. That's part of the conversation. And Katie and Tom, I don't know if you have anything specific just from that perspective to add at this point.
Well, in terms of just answering your question head on, Paul, the notion was that the executive director that we envisioned originally when under the OSU ownership model was the person running the forest. That person has full oversight of all the activities happening on the forest, whether it's the recreation activities, whether it's the research, whether it's timber sales. That person has oversight of each part. The forest manager might be the one laying out the timber sale, but it's the executive director that is working directly with that individual, making sure that they're meeting the objectives as stated in the plan and in the operational plans. And so as Shannon said, once we got into the shift in that ownership model back to a state ownership model, but as a public entity, we use that same term, executive director, sort of describing this overarching ownership, this individual that's in charge of the public entity. And it sort of muddied those waters a bit. And we're still working through exactly what that looks like in terms of who's operating or in charge of this structure of the public entity versus what we see as the full operations director for the Elliott State Forest, Research Forest. So as far as we're concerned, there is still that position, that what we originally called the executive director position for the forest, but now we have this other layer sitting above it, and we're still working through exactly what that looks like. So Paul or Katie, if there's something you wanted to add to that, but that's how I see who's running the forest. And that executive director, of course, of the forest, or our original vision of an executive director or the operations director, answers to me, answers to the dean of the College of Forestry.
But so these other positions, in the way you just described it, are over the forest manager or the ED or whatever title we're giving.
No, they're under the forest, the ED.
They're under.
Yeah.
Okay. Who actually is going to write the plan?
Who's writing the plan? The forest management plan?
Yeah.
Well, Shannon is in charge of directing the writing of the forest management plan, pulling together all the pieces to put together the forest management plan.
Okay, thank you.
Paul Odenthal, did you have a input on the sort of governance discussion that related?
Yeah. I mean, I think Tom described it. I mean, Paul, as we work through I think our next task as we talk about the legislative concept is the responsibilities of the executive director of the forest, or whatever we call that title as well. But it's, as we design this, there will be that lead person on the entity side, and there will be a lead person on the Oregon State side that are working very closely together. And then I think what Shannon is describing is that structure in OSU below in the forest management piece.
Thanks, Paul. And thanks, Paul, back for the questions. Any additional thoughts? We'll welcome those too. Ken, you were next, yeah.
I didn't see Shannon take a great big gulp when it was described her job.
Can't hear you, Ken.
Sorry, what's going on here?
You're audible, but it's very quiet. So maybe leaning into your computer a little bit will help.
Maybe I'll lean into the screen here a little bit, Peter, if that'll help, and I'll tweak my microphone when we're done here. I had a couple things that I wanted to say. One is it's always hard to follow Paul because he has these great questions. I had a couple of much simpler questions, and one of those was when we start looking at RFP. Looks like you're still having a really hard time hearing me, Peter.
Yeah, you may need to get right up there next to your computer. I can get you, and I'll try to translate your questions if it doesn't come through well.
I'll try again. I'll keep it really short. Public engagement in terms of the RFP and the people that are going to, I was glad, Shannon, to hear you say persons or entities, you know, beyond one, could be multiple folks replying to these RFPs to get the right kind of expertise that you want. But secondarily, public engagement, I think, is going to be a key one, and hopefully you'll take a hard look at public engagement records from some of the folks that reply to your RFP, in particular, things like the research design overall and silvicultural systems. I think there'll be a lot of a lot of people questioning what it is we're doing going forward. And then secondarily, the monitoring piece of the whole overall program. Shannon, I'm an ex-Forest Service guy, and have been watching the Forest Service not do their monitoring for decades upon decades. And I think it's really important that we emphasize very directly and very clearly what we're looking for in terms of monitoring. That's all I had, and I'll work on my microphone.
Thanks, Ken. Helpful suggestions, and I note people taking a lot of notes, and I should have mentioned it earlier, but Jenna will create a meeting summary of this, and I think you are all aware that we're recording it as well. So any other thoughts, observations, questions from the group? And I know that a couple of advisory committee members couldn't be here today and intend to listen to the recording, and will I suspect follow up with some suggestions as well. Good.
I just had one
Tom?
item to add. Yeah, no, just Shannon, as you talk through the research implementation team, you know, we gave the sort of expertise areas of the or committee. You gave the expertise areas of these that will be covered, but first of all, soils wasn't specifically highlighted, and that was a huge oversight on our part, but we'll get that fixed. And then the other part of it was just, there are people behind all these topical areas, and we can put together a list, or we have a list that we can share of the individuals that are already engaged in that. And we've gone out, as indicated earlier by myself, through the Dean's Advisory Committee, which is other deans on campus representing CEOS and College of Ag and College of Science and research office, that they're helping identify people as well as time goes on, of if you need this expertise filled, here's where you can, you know, pick it up within, or here's somebody that should be involved that isn't currently, and getting that kind of feedback from them as well. But just wanted to make that point, that there's people behind all this, not just general expertise areas.
Yes, thank you for that, Tom, and apologies for the oversight on soils. But you're right, we do have a list of people behind each of those categories that we're continuing to look at and add to.
Okay. Shannon, did you have more on your presentation that you wanted to cover?
That's it for the capacity and expertise portion. We did want to talk about the FMP development and process approach today as well.
I think we're ready.
Okay, and Tom, I think you had a couple of comments to lead off this section, is that right?
Yeah, just a couple. I'll try to be brief. I just, you know, as Shannon said at the outset, that the research plan and the FMP are inextricably linked. They're basically one and the same. One leads into the other. And just to reiterate that notion of where we've come from and why we're here, you know, we as a team, and specifically the Stakeholder Advisory Committee or Stakeholder Advisory Board and the Oregon Consensus, DSL and OSU working together under the charge from the State Land Board, believe that we can establish a state-of-the-art, really unparalleled research facility at the Elliott State Forest as the Elliott State Research Forest. And with the intention of recognizing that, we face these really serious environmental challenges in the form of climate change and in the form of species extinction, and as well as social challenges such as rural community economic declines. And so the objectives, behind this research forest is, how do we meet human resource needs in terms of shelter and wood products and other resources, while doing the best possible job of protecting species diversity and storing carbon. And the Elliott State Research Forest represents this amazing resource to conduct that very research. And that's why we're all here. That's why we're in the midst of getting this forest management plan written. And then the last thing I'll say on that is just that the DSL and OSU continue to work together on refining exactly the next steps along the pathway to get this plan written, and the intergovernmental agreement between DSL and OSU has been signed by DSL and shared with us, approved by our team, and is now just in the somewhere deep in the bureaucracy of OSU waiting for a signature. It should be today or hopefully today. I don't know, I'll let Paul weigh in on that. But anyhow, we're really pleased to keep that, to have that agreement in place. And that really is the catalyst for really accelerating our activities on writing the forest management plan. And with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Shannon.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so digging into the details of the FMP development and process approach. This is another figure that I'm sure you've all seen before, but just wanted to revisit it to really focus on the fact that this is a stepwise iterative process. This is not, working in little bite-sized separate pieces. We are going to be continuing to work from the perspective that as we go through each one of these steps, we are getting input from various committees and from the public, and really putting that engagement and communications plan that we'll detail more at another meeting into place. But at each of these stages, we are working on specific pieces of the FMP that will then build on each other. And as I said, work through an iterative process. So as we're collecting information and data to put together the data management plan, we're getting input there from various expertise as well as committees and the public. We'll be continuing to work on model simulations that will feed into designing experiments. We'll be working on this landscape analysis piece that will feed into the monitoring plan along with the experimental design and the data management. And all of these pieces then building up to this final forest management plan, where we're integrating all of these separate steps and sections that we're going to be working on. And once again, the forest management plan is the why and how of the research plan and the research forest. So this is a snapshot of a piece of our timeline. And you can see that we have various steps here laid out for specific quarters. The overall timeline has not changed from the beginning of this process. The start dates have changed. And so that's kind of what we're operating with. You can see that we have steps happening at the same time, leading into that stepwise iterative process. And I'm going to be going into more detail about specifically the work that we'll be doing in this first time period between between October and February 1st. So there's quite a lot of text here on this slide. I want to go through this piece by piece. The first area that we're looking at here is creating a dedicated database and document repository. So the current data needs to be brought together in a dedicated space with all of our documents. The framework for the data repository will be established in order to keep and maintain data integrity and availability. And the database will be similar to, although not identical to, the one found on the H.J. Andrews website. So the goal there is to make sure, once again, that we are managing the data for long-term integrity, that we have a platform where that data is accessible and shareable, especially the long-term records, so that anyone would be able to access it. So as we're working through this part of the process, we'll be hiring and appointing a data specialist, establishing a framework for the database and repository dedicated to the Elliott State Research Forest. We'll be presenting a beta version of the database framework to stakeholders, and once tested, we'll make it available to the general public in a manner comparable to the H.J. Andrews website. So again, not exactly the same, but very, very comparable. We'll be working with DSL to ensure a pathway for long-term compatibility with state database systems and providing access to the raw real-time data. We'll begin to collect, transfer, and input select existing data sets. And then we'll be working on updated LiDAR, and this analysis is already underway. And later this morning, Deanne Carlson will be presenting a piece of that, so you can see what that bare ground imagery is looking like today. And I believe we're expecting to have that final LiDAR data from what was flown this summer that will be available to us in December of 2021. So this is the database document repository piece of it. Is there any feedback or questions on this part of our timeline and what we're planning to do between now and February 1st?
Where's the money coming from to hire these folks? Is this OSU budget? Is this expected to be Elliott budget?
So this is one of the pieces, as Tom mentioned, with that amendment to the intergovernmental agreement. Part of that is funds coming in. So that's something that we've been working on with DSL. So we now have the funds in place to hire and appoint that data specialist.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, you came on camera. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Just that in the conversations we've had from DSL's perspective, everything's on track, and we're really thrilled that the agreement for funding has been signed, and we're fine if that's made available to folks on the working group with the timeline that's in there, the scope of work, so they can see the full picture. We are just wanting, our main goal is to make sure that this working group is comfortable with where how the process for the FMP is going to unfold over and make sure that's real clear and understood, and everybody's comfortable between now and the end of January as part of this work plan. So I think to the extent that you all are really feeling read in and understand where things are headed and why and how they'll be funded, that's our primary goal. Thanks, Peter.
Anyone else? Comments or questions? All right, Shannon, you can continue. And on that point, that was as you're moving there forward, Shannon, I did get a text that Mark Stern was unexpectedly tied up, and but we'll provide feedback as well.
Okay, Wonderful, thank you. So just a couple more notes on this database and data piece. We will be presenting the working capabilities of this database repository to the advisory committee. We're also going to be working, looking more longer term on beginning to update the maps and data that we do have, working on necessary on the ground stand age inventories and updated data, identify any missing pieces and working to fill in those gaps, and purchasing equipment for data collection. So those are just kind of a farther kind of vision of where we're going, as opposed to this piece that's really what we're focusing on for this, this first time period. Okay, so another piece is the monitoring plan development. So we're going to be initiating development of a monitoring plan that makes certain that involved parties are measuring the key variables that we need at the right temporal and spatial scale to ensure success of the research and management program. So a couple of components that we're working on between now and February 1st include identifying components that would be included in the monitoring plan, including carbon and climate monitoring, aquatic riparian monitoring, wildlife and biodiversity, and social science and recreation. We're going to be producing a framework and conceptual monitoring plan that we'll present to the DSL Advisory Committee for input and feedback, and provide anticipated framework, schedule, and timeline, as well as the process for completing the key components of the monitoring plan. And we'll be sharing that with the advisory committee as well. So in our budget, we have investment in startup monitoring costs, as well as a plan for ongoing expenses. But we need to make sure that we are measuring the key variables, as I said, at the right temporal and spatial scales to ensure success. So that needs to be kind of the foundation of the monitoring program that we're putting together through this FMP development process. And in particular, this is important because the research outcomes that we're monitoring, as well as our adaptive management approach, are all really firmly based on having a robust monitoring program. And that's going to help ensure success, that we're assessing the success of species conservation, ecosystem services delivery, and other goals and objectives that are outlined in the research proposal. And Paul, you had a really great comment in our earlier, as we were talking about capacity and expertise, and making sure that we're emphasizing our monitoring plan and the components very clearly. So that's something that we're working on now, and we'll be sharing out with the committee for questions and feedback. Are there any other comments or questions from this group at this stage about where we are with the monitoring plan, or what you feel would be important to see?
Anybody? Okay.
Okay. So forest management plan development. The key things that we're working on here between now and February 1st are a proposed FMP scope and timeline, targeting a partial draft of key sections of the FMP prior to the December 2022 meeting of the Land Board. So this is something that we're working on now, and we'll be presenting to the advisory committee at the December 2021 meeting, so just about 2 months from now. We also are working on an FMP engagement plan that will once again be presenting at the December 2021 meeting for feedback and comments from the advisory committee. We are developing the criteria, process, and timing for undertaking the adaptive management phased implementation across the watershed. So we're working on what that plan looks like right now. We're identifying models that will simulate processes key to the management planning on the Elliott. So this includes things like harvest scheduling, forest growth, hydrologic systems, and carbon flux models. And then, as I said earlier, we'll be working on appointing this research plan implementation committee. We already have a list drafted based on those areas of expertise that I showed earlier, as well as hiring staff, including that data management specialist and postdocs who will work on specific pieces of this FMP based on their expertise. So with all of this, we are bringing together existing data. We have plans to collect updated data. We're working on modeling and bringing all of these pieces together on this landscape analysis effort that will really inform the forest management plan. So we're taking a holistic approach to this analysis. We'll continue to refine all of the sections of the FMP and move forward with other steps as we have additional data gathered, analyzed, and incorporated into that process. And overall, our next steps, collaboration is key, as we've all noted. So we will actively seek advice and external expertise to help develop a fully integrated research forest management plan that achieves the highest degree of integrity. We're going to be continuing to reach out to this committee. And throughout this process, just wanted to reiterate this core FMP team at OSU. We are more than happy to talk with you about your questions, concerns, any feedback you have. So that would be myself, Katie Kavanaugh, and Anna Magnuson. And with that, I wanted to open it up for any additional input or feedback, concerns about the process. And from your perspective, are there any steps that you would really like us to focus in on and pay attention to?
Thanks, Shannon. And maybe you can, yeah, there you go. Perfect. Then we can see each other. I'm gonna give just a little extra time. I know Ken's microphone's not working right now, so he's wanting to. You can send me a question in the chat, Ken. And Fergus, we'll get to you and during public comment. If that's okay. Just to keep with the structure here. All right. Sounds like folks have gotten their questions answered so far and probably need a little time to mull on stuff. So I intuit and know from the OSU team that this is not a one-time invitation for your thoughts and reflections and suggestions. That's an open invitation to continue to provide feedback once you've mulled on this a bit and if ideas occur to you. And Paul, I see you've come off mute if you have something you wanted to share.
Yeah, and just kind of a first blush response is this is huge and it's complicated. That is a lot of people, and I wonder about how effective, how efficient that's going to be. It just sounds like just a huge amount of folks trying to do something that maybe a smaller group could do. Anyway, that's just my initial thoughts. It just sounds monstrous, cumbersome.
I appreciate that, Paul. I think, especially when we lay it all out at once like that and present committees as participants, it seems like a gigantic number of people, but though the committees do compartmentalize specific demands, and the team really devoted to focusing on writing of the plan and coordinating the writing of the plan is a small and nimble group. So I recognize it does just seem kind of out, like it's a huge thing, but first of all, as I said, it's compartmentalized, but then also if you look at like the development of the OESF forest management plan, the Olympic State Experimental Forest. There was, I don't know, Katie, I might get this wrong, but I think there was 26 people listed as the, the team directly working on it. And of course, having been affiliated with that in the early stages in terms of being on the board of natural resources there, there was people not in that 26 that were affiliated with working on the project as a whole, but of course they were working on some piece of it, like I said, as a committee or as a subset. So it is a big job. We are not just doing a forest management plan, we're doing a research forest management plan, which makes it uniquely complicated. The data requirements are different, and the exact and the demand for precision in our data is exceptionally high, and the diversity of things that we're proposing to study, monitor, and address as a research forest requires a diverse set of capacities and abilities. So I know it seems huge, but I think that it's all part of our, we have that compartmentalized to create more efficiency.
Paul, I agree with you totally. It is incredibly daunting. That's one reason why we think it will take time. I mean, it's not something we'll be able to do overnight. And so that piece of it is I think definitely true and part of the dauntingness of it. The other piece, though, that we have to keep in mind, that I keep in mind, that helps me sleep at night, is that we've already got the research management plan, which has a lot of the guidance in it and a lot of the strategy. So we don't have to reiterate that piece. And so that helps me a lot. And I also recognize that why the strategic nature of the forest management plan is also going to be paired with an operational plan. And I think that also is another part. So you're right, it's daunting in its content, but it's no more content than we already have engaged in doing the research management plan, except that what I think we need to bring in some more specificity now and to really shake out some more details. So I appreciate your insights, and I think you're right. It is big and it is daunting, and luckily we have some really good minds, and there's people that are very excited about this as a research forest and are willing to dedicate some of their time to it. So.
Colin?
Yeah, I didn't see under the monitoring goals, I didn't see anything related to an ongoing forest inventory. And for me, that seems like it's really the foundation of any monitoring program, is to determine if your vegetation treatments are having the desired outcomes as far as forest composition, structure, stocking, as well as the harvest outputs, and then determining if that forest composition is having the desired effect on wildlife. So I just wanted to bring that up and mention that that's something that I'd like to see as the foundation of the monitoring program.
Colin, yeah, I can address that too. We currently have in our budget for monitoring roughly a 10% land-based monitoring built in right now. And so with the idea that we'll have a long-term record of stand response to our treatments, not just a short term, but we really want a long-term record. And so that is already built into our budget for the monitoring, and the idea that the inventory is really important. We're also really lucky, and you'll hear a little bit from Bogdan later, but we're also really lucky to incorporate some new technologies in our inventory methodology. that also will help us to be more numerically descriptive as opposed to a typical sampling scheme that is often done. You know, I don't know if, I'm sure you know, most inventory is done, but the variance around each one of those numbers is really high typically because we only subsample the stand and stands are highly variable. So we're looking at methodologies that can give us a more comprehensive monitoring plan that also has a relatively low variance because we'll be measuring more whole systems rather than a lot of subsampling. So that's just, but I agree totally, and that's definitely part of the plan.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions from the committee? Yeah, Ken,
I just wanted to see if you can hear me yet.
we can hear you. You're gonna want to speak up, but we can hear you. You are audible.
All right, got that fixed. Thank you. No questions, just that. Can you hear me now? Thank you.
Verified. All right. Shannon, anything else you were wanting to cover? Okay.
No, I think at this point, we wanted to hand it over to Bogdan Strimbu to give a little bit more detail to some of the analytical components.
Great. And maybe folks would benefit from a 5-minute break. Should we take a 5 minutes here from your clock of reference? And, remember that your cameras are on for some of you. Turn them off while we're on a break, while you're on a break, and we'll see you in 5.
I just try to see if I can share. Sorry.
It looked like it worked there, and it looks like folks are starting to rejoin us here. We'll give them just another minute to come back, and as they do, hopefully they turn their videos on so we can see that they're with us. All right. Okay, I think we've got, it looks like on video, and then for those that aren't on video, I think we've got the majority of folks back here. And Bogdan, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I think you've got a presentation for us.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Bogdan Strâmbu. I am with the College of Forestry in the firm department, and I am one of the few people who is working on remote sensing, but also on optimization. So what I will be speaking today, it will be a little bit about the new way of executing forest inventory using LiDAR, particularly LiDAR under the canopy. As any teacher, feel free to stop me while I'm speaking. So we are trained to do that. So don't get shy. Okay, I hope that you see my screen. Let's see. Okay, if you can see my screen, then I will gonna get going. So the title of my my presentation today is doesn't sound very cool in the sense that there is no LiDAR in. But just the comprehensive forest inventory and what is this new inventory encompasses. So I'm going to start by just refreshing very fast how we're executing the forest inventory, and Katie already make a short introduction to that. Then the point clouds that we have, and there are many classifications. The one that I will be using today is based on the location of the sensor in respect with the forest, either above or below the canopy. And then what comprehensive forest inventory means in for today forestry, basically, when we are looking to many attributes, not just a few of them. So how we execute today the forest inventory, basically, we are using sampling. No? And the sampling is done either by compass and pacing, the old school. And believe me or not, I have been in many places where cruising is still done by compass and pacing. That's the rule of the game. Or using all sorts of devices that has a GPS built in. At the end of the day, something like this come about. We have, let's say that this is the piece of land, and then we just walk a particular specified distance between some plots. Okay. We end up with some tally sheets that measures some, but only that thing, whatever is on the tally sheet. And as soon as we leave the forest, and I want to make this very clear, that as soon as we leave the forest with the tally sheets on our end, that pretty much it with our forest inventory. We cannot extract any subsequent information, but whatever is in those tally sheets. Okay, so it's really restricted to the initial inventory. And being a sample has confidence intervals, which includes variability that Kathy just mentioned there. And in many instances, basically in most of the instances, that variability is large enough to warrant a new way of technology or new way of doing inventory. And this is exactly what I will be speaking about. So that new type of inventory is based on point clouds. And now we're going to start with, I will start with above canopy point clouds, because those are by far the most popular one. And probably you have seen pictures like this, elevation maps, basically, where each point is colored according to altitude. Most of the LiDAR data acquisition looks like this. They are colored. it's a process that it's erroneous on itself, but overall it's going to give us a very pleasant description of the reality. The main product that comes from any LiDAR is ground. And Leanne, we're going to speak a little bit later on about the ground, but we have the ability right now to see something that was impossible like 30 or 50, 40 years ago. And if you zoom in, I zoom in this area, we can see that depending on how many points hit the ground, we can have a very, very good description of the ground itself. Now, how does that help us? That helps us big time because we can execute a kind of a introductory inventory. So I just carved out that rectangle that I just show you. I carve out the point cloud, the points from that point cloud, and I create a new one. And then we basically identify with various algorithms the crown of the trees. Okay, and above canopy, it's really efficient for large area, but misses some very important details, particularly how to put it. I tell the students where the cookies are, in the sense that the stems and the branches. And the algorithms of today, they really doesn't do a bad job. They get more than 90%, some of them, particularly for the Pacific Northwest forest when we have that pointy upper canopy. In many instances, we can get even 95%. And I just want to be very clear about that for tall trees, LiDAR provide better height estimates than humans because we have vibration on our hand that is really prone to errors. So now I'm starting whatever is the topic of today because I wanted to put things in perspective, the below canopy point clouds. So what below canopy point clouds looks like looks almost the same with the dense point clouds acquired from above, but now we get a lot of returns, a lot of points describing the lower portion of the trees, basically the branches and the stem. And here you see six plots showing various degree of complexity of the forest, complexity represented in the variability between the trees, okay, numerically, not necessarily silvicultural. So I took the first one and I just zoom it out, and this is the view from above. This is a view from a side. I know that it's a 2D showing of a 3D object, and most of the people, including myself, I need a little bit of time if I'm not familiar with that area to realize that, oh, you know, this is a 3D object. And this is the DTM that actually come out from a below canopy LiDAR, because the same product that come out from above can come from below, with the difference that we have a way higher resolution than coming from above. So what is the new forest inventory? Now, that's where I'm really getting excited. So the new forest inventory it's an inventory that acquire information on a broad spectrum of attributes, not only diameter, heights, and some other dendrometrical attributes, but also some that are relevant for fire, for wildlife, for aesthetics, for example. And what we succeeded in developing here at OSU, we developed an algorithm that can measure every single diameter along the stems, identifying the grounds and the crown of the trees. And what you see here, the coloring scheme, is just showing you the three classes. And this is really a big step forward, because now we can compute easily extremely valuable attributes that could be used, for example, in forest resilience, because we know where crowns start, how deep is the crown, we can compute the volume of the crown, all sorts of things that could be used in fire. Also, we also have the ability to identify the branches and measure some dimensions of the branches, important also for fire, but now we are speaking wildlife. So that is one stand, which is a little bit less complexity. This is a stand with higher complexity. And I just want to point out that not only that we find out the canopy, which is high, I hope that we see my mouse. but also the understory, which is really a valuable tool. So we have right now at our disposal a tool that basically not only measures the stems, but identify attributes relevant to other aspects of forest management. Now, if you ask yourself, okay, how well the measurements are done, this is an example of how well the algorithm performs, meaning that it will be available for people to use, even in conditions like in figure A, where the point cloud, it's really hard to make it up, like a measurement, because it is this diameter, it's a series within the stem. We were able to measure the diameter, even in this very messy situation, or like this in very incomplete situations, or now when points are missing because the sensor was not located such that we're going to see that portion of the tree. Now, this is, I told you about the stem. How about branches? So the same approach can be used for breaking the tree, like we have it here, into components in the stem, branches, and then smaller level branches. But this, we are using a pure geometric approach because the branches, they present so much variability on themselves that we have to basically cut some corners and assume cylindricity of some portion of the branches, and then we put those cylinders together to actually make up the branch. But in the end, we end up with measurements of diameter of the branch, the length of the branch, and all that kind of stuff that can be used in fire and wildlife as well as in aesthetics. So how expensive is this? It's a little bit more expensive because you have to actually walk the entire stand. This is a full-fledged inventory, which we're going to capture, as I said, diameters, branches, and defects. Easy to compute, lean and sweep. Very easy from the data that we have, but also we are able to delineate. We have a pet project right now, cat face and other defects that are not necessarily associated with dendrometric values. If you ask, okay, how good it is, it's 95% for tree identification and 2 millimeters errors. And why this is important is because all the estimates are not statistics. So there is zero variability around. Why? Because we know everything. We were going to inventory every single tree within the forest. Therefore, the confidence interval, it's irrelevant. It will be replaced with some other statistics, which is the error in estimating those attributes. So how many trees am I missing or I'm adding because of the algorithm? Or how off are my measurements? But those estimation of errors are way, and I'm speaking way smaller than the variance coming from sample. Okay, we measure diameter anywhere along the stems with a tenth of an inch error. And if you think that this error is pretty much constant, even for small trees, we get somewhere around 2 millimeters, which is not necessarily very good. But in the same time, you think that I'm not going to go and scan trees that are 4 inches in diameter because those are too dense. But for trees which are, let's say, 50 inches, a tenth of an inch diameter, a tenth of an inch error, that's pretty much almost imperceptible. The point clouds acquired from underneath, they have an issue, and that issue is that they don't see the top, therefore the height is not necessarily the best way to go. I say that it's expensive because you have to walk, but it's not very, very slow because right now we can cruise to provide 100% inventory of 50 acres in one day. Walking, data processing, and all the parameters that are of interest, everything in one day. So how we can fix the height issue is, and this image, I just want to show you the the data that was acquired with an above canopy LiDAR system, and you see this is the canopy surface model, and you clearly see the trees on this side, while here, this is the canopy surface model developed from the terrestrial LiDAR from under the canopy, where the trees are not very well defined. So how we can fix this? Simply by merging the above and below canopy. And that merging can be done either by using LiDAR all over the place, meaning flying LiDAR above and use a LiDAR sensor underneath. And the results are simply spectacular, to say the least. Or we can merge something like the LiDAR sensor underneath with a cheaper sensor acquired by a $500 drone that we're going to provide. As you see, we compare here the above canopy LiDAR with above canopy point cloud produced from the UAV, which is called FODAR, or photogrammetric point clouds. The terminology is not quite established right now. But the catch here is that we can use a drone very cheap with a very good data acquired from underneath and obtain very solid results in terms of full-fledged inventory. So this is kind of a conclusion in the sense that what is comprehensive forest inventory, in my view at least, basically merging above and below data. We are dealing with populations, not with the sample anymore. Therefore, we will know exactly what's going on in the entire forest. It is precise and accurate, clearly superior than the current inventory methods. Oops, I see an S here that shouldn't be. One thing that is really, really valuable of this inventory is that it offers us a permanent record. So if somehow we need information 5 years, 20 years, 100 years from the moment when data was acquired, we can go back and compute those attributes that are of interest that were not acquired at the moment of the inventory. Okay. And last but not least, being entirely digital and knowing exactly how big the trees are and where the trees are, not only the size, but also the location, that could feed and will feed directly the new gross and yield models. That there are several models that work on spatially explicit, climate sensitive gross and yield model to replace the new way of describing the forest dynamics. And questions for me? I don't know if I was too fast, too excited, or too slow. And I apologize for the typo. I don't know what that.
I'm actually excited. I've spent most of my career as that person that was wandering around there putting plots in, and I would offer a couple of things. One, my cruises were 100% accurate on species, not 95%, but 100%. This is an incredible technology, but it just seems to me that you don't want to throw out the baby with the wash. You want to combine the old with the new. This is incredible. It's accurate, but it still needs to have somebody out there ground truthing it to ensure that the defect is not simple. I can't imagine a computer being able to detect a cat face or a conch or any of those things that we see out there on the ground. So I love the idea. I'd like to see it combined with the old.
We are researchers, no, so we have to develop technology and then let the industry make it operational. But my own experience is that the person who is doing the cruising, basically the walking through the woods, in the same time can measure few diameters just to do the ground truthing. So those two things can go in the same time. And obviously there will be a sampling procedure, a sampling protocol for how the trees are measured, but there is nothing preclude, how to put it, doing both of them in the same time. The biggest advantage of this technology is on two pillars. One, it's 100% every single tree is seen. And secondly, the dimensional values are better than the human estimates. That's those are the big advantages of this technology. Yes, Ken, you have a question. I see it. And I don't see all of you. But...
Actually, Paul, I think you had a follow-up, and then we'll get to Ken. Why don't we?
This sounds like this John Henry moment where we put the machine up against the man. But I'd be willing to do it. Like I say, it's a great technology. I like the idea that you can combine the old with the new.
I like the idea of Paul back out there against machine.
He's laid the gauntlet down saying he's 100% accurate. So
on species, yeah, that's easy. The one question I would have is the 50 acres a day. Was that on the Coast Range, or was that in Central Oregon in the flat pine country?
It is on a Coast Range. So we tested the stand. Now, you really hit a point here where, you know what, those 50 acres, they are not on that slope, on that slope, okay? So it is a stand that was thin probably 4 or 5 years ago. We have several stands that from research forest that we cruise, not 50, we cruise 10 acres, and we cruise 10 acres like in an hour. And the 50 acres, it was a real stand with higher and lower and brushes and all that kind of stuff. And it took us a day. But it is, I cannot give you the exact location, but it's a little bit north of Corvallis on a private property.
So Ken, and then I have a question for the OSU team as well. Go ahead, Ken. We don't have your audio, Ken, unfortunately. We had you, and now it's gone. What? Can you send a chat to all of us, and we'll try to respond to that. And while you're typing that out, if you can, it looks like Colin's got a question. Go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think this technology is pretty awesome. I mean, I've been kind of watching LiDAR for the past 20 years and anticipating that at some point we'd be able to use LiDAR for inventory. And just in the last couple of years, it seems like we're there where it's functional now. And that's pretty cool. It's the above ground light or above canopy LiDAR is something that I'm looking at to use on our own tribal forest. And the below ground or the below canopy LiDAR is something that I thought was coming. I didn't realize we were quite there yet, but that's cool to see that we are. Something I wanted to mention is that there are still limitations with defect is one area, especially with mechanical defect. So I think there's still going to be a need for people on the ground looking at that, looking at post-harvest, what sort of mechanical damage is happening as a result of harvest, especially in things or where you have lots of retention and regeneration harvest units. Another area is with reforestation. A lot of this the research platform is anticipating that the regeneration will come from natural regeneration. And I think it's going to be really important to monitor that, to see if we're getting the type of regeneration that we're looking for. And with LiDAR, I think the limitation there is that once those small trees are big enough and they're out of the brush enough to actually get picked up by the LiDAR, it might be too late to adapt the management to change the trajectory of the stand. So I think it's going to be important still, especially post-harvest and when we're trying to regenerate a conifer forest, to have people out there doing those stalking surveys so that if there's problems, we can pick those up while there's still time to do something about it.
Thanks, Colin.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer another question that's kind of come up as well. And is this something we're going to do everywhere, on a frequent basis or whatever? And I'm going to speak, Bogdan can override me, but I think that based on a couple limitations, one is understanding the technology, improving the technology is the first limitation. So Paul's concern about, doing both things, definitely, because we want to be able to connect the past with the future. So there has to be some overlap in the proof of concept. So there definitely would be some work there. The second one would be limitations on data storage and these data sets. And so I can see this, at least initially, being something where you would set it up for permanent plots. So one of the part of the monitoring would be permanent plots. And so this would be a great addition to those permanent plots and to start archiving these data sets for the future. So I think that is also a place. And so the permanent plot structure, which would include multiple treatments and controls, will be a lot of what our monitoring plan is. And I think this is going to be a game changer in that we get 100% sample. But again, it doesn't do soils, for example. It doesn't do a lot of things that are also part of this structure. So it's a panacea for some measurements. It's not a panacea for all of them. And we're really aware of that as well.
Thanks, Katie. Really helpful clarification and point. Ken, let's try your microphone again. Afraid not, buddy.
I
Sorry.
will make just one addition, like as Katie said, these data tend to be very high, like in terms of size. So as of now, we don't see, or at least I don't see the usage of this technology except for moments when the stands are right before the harvest, when you are gonna get something out of it. For the rest of the stand life, the aerial LiDAR we're gonna do an okay job. But right before a commercial thinning or the regeneration harvest, when you have big trees, very valuable trees, then it's worth doing that. Not for every single stand, but just for the one that are really worth getting after. Basically, chase your cookies.
Thanks. Ken, are you trying again here? No? Okay. I think Deanne will maybe transition to you, but before we do that, I wondered if the OSU team wanted to mention sort of at all status of the LiDAR data and when we expect that to be ready, just to remind folks of that, as well as sort of whether and how this technology and methodology might apply with the FMP as this group sort of thinks through how the FMP development process here. And Shannon, I'm assuming that's you, but anybody from the team feel free to weigh in.
I saw Katie unmute first, so I'll follow up on what Katie says.
Well, I just wanted to say something too before we get into this too far is I really want to thank Jeff and Ryan, because they're the ones that really took this bull by the horns and walked it through to make sure the contract was done, and so that we have this data in such a valuable time. So I just really wanted to make sure we recognize their contribution, and they're still obviously heavily involved. And so Jeff, you can answer the question of the timing if you want. I don't know if you want to come in and answer that question, but
Well, the contract calls for the quality assurance, the QA/QC stuff, and to be done by December sometime. So that's when the final data set will be delivered from the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries to OSU. I haven't had any conversations, and just curious just how you're planning on integrating it into the FMP process. So I don't have any sense of that, but that's the contract.
I think that was the second part of my question.
yeah, Shannon, do you want to talk about that integration piece?
Sure. I mean, I can talk about it broadly, and we are going to be, putting together a more detailed timeline, as I said, for that December 2021 meeting, where we'll be able to kind of address this more on specific timescales. But as we have that new LiDAR data available, we're going to be working on analyzing that and incorporating that into our planning, and the FMP actually writing that section of the FMP simultaneously as we continue all of these other pieces. And the same goes for the monitoring plan. So as we're designing some of the experiments, including one of the thinning experiments that's a priority for us in this FMP, we're going to be having those conversations about what this monitoring system needs to look like. What does that network of permanent plots need to look like? And addressing that at that point in the FMP writing process. And Katie, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that as well.
I'll let Dan. Dan probably will also have some good comments on that too, because we've been working a lot with the 2008 LiDAR and all of its strengths and weaknesses. So that's part of, I think, what Dan's going to talk about is what additional information we can get from the new LiDAR. And particularly stand heights, which is a big piece of identifying certain species and habitats and other, and help us identify where the older trees are as individual trees. So I'll let her cover that, but there's a whole lot of pieces in there that maybe after Dan's presentation, we could answer those questions.
That sounds great. And Colin, I didn't know if you had, you had come back on video, so I didn't know if you had another question before we moved to Deanne.
Yeah, I had another quick question on LiDAR. I was curious if the LiDAR data that was collected over the summer is of sufficient resolution to develop a LiDAR inventory. And then my second part of that question was, my understanding, at least from the contractors that I've been talking to, is that to develop a LiDAR inventory, you need a STEM mapped inventory on the ground that was completed the same growth year as the LiDAR flight. And I'm wondering if that's in the works.
That's a Bogdan question, I think.
Okay, this, as I just showed you in presentation, both canopy will gonna give us extremely good heights, and the number of points per square meter, basically the density of the point cloud, is the highest that QSI provide in the normal price range. So I am almost positive that we're going to get extremely tree count and extremely well tree count and heights. Now, in addition to the normal point clouds that LiDAR that is acquired, university will get full wave LiDAR. And full wave LiDAR allow us to play significantly with the point cloud density. So we can get extremely dense point cloud. It's like thing like that, like a dial in terms of On one axis is how trustworthy are the points, and on other dial being how many points, on other axis, how many points you're going to get. So as many points as you're going to get, as less reliable there are. So from QSI, they are 100% or almost 100% reliable on the 30 points per square meter. That is the expected delivery. But we are expecting to get way, way more points inside here at OSU. So to answer your question, I am envisaging that we will going to get a very good forest inventory, because we will, I hope, we will be able to measure at least height to the base of the canopy. And for some areas, some diameters, the areas that are open, because of the full wave LiDAR. That's, I have to be specific about that. Does that answer your question, or is it got too convoluted?
Yeah, so it sounds like from the LiDAR, you'll have at least a couple inventory metrics, but maybe not everything, probably not species, or that sort of thing.
It's so full wave LiDAR was proven to be successful in identifying species. And this is something new. It's a very new technology. I was a part of the team who worked on species identification from LiDAR. But as Paul said, as any algorithm, there will be errors. The difference being that you're going to know very large areas.
Thanks, Bogdan. And Ryan, did you have something? And then Ken, I see your comment, and I'll note that for folks.
Yeah, just real quick. I think maybe to get to Colin's question, as part of this contract, yeah, we did not have the training plots as part of this data collection to tie to individual stands, to have actual metrics and summaries for every single stand. So it's going to be more wall to wall and less about like, hey, you know, this stand over here has X amount of basal area, volume, trees per acre, et cetera, because that takes those training plots on the ground. And so that was not part of this contract. So I think the data that will be available from this is more of that wall to wall across the forest, not tied to individual stands.
Not tied to any individual stands, I think was the conclusion there. You broke up just a little bit, Ryan.
Nope, sorry. Yeah.
Got it. And Ken made the observation that the LiDAR information has proven to be really a super helpful tool also in locating old road systems, and even in places where air photos and on the ground work maybe is even difficult to identify those, and especially in the case of shorter length logging systems versus those older, larger systems. So thanks, Ken. Deanne, are you ready to move us forward? And I should note, Paul Beck has a hard stop at 11. So if he drops off, that will be, you have forewarning on that.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready. I don't have any real technical discussion. I'm mainly here showing what we have of imagery of some preliminary data, and just it'll show some of the capabilities that we've got with the airborne acquisition that was flown this summer. So let's see, if I got the screen, I guess I can share with you. Are we seeing that? Good.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I just put together a series of slides. I used the aerial imagery that was available to me, some recent flights of photogrammetry, and then I made some comparisons with our 2008 LiDAR data and the 2021 flight from this summer. All I have right now are bare earth data. I wish I'd added just some examples of vegetation heights, because that's really, really important to us to show for planning, that was a real limitation that we've had during the research planning and HCP process, is having up-to-date vegetation height data, because otherwise all we had was the photos, Google Earth photos, and which was very helpful, and the inventory data from, I think it was 2015 was maybe the most recent, 2014, 2015. Anyway, I'll just go through these, and it's just mainly just showing an example of what the new LiDAR is able to do. So here's a photo. This is Salander Creek. It's actually not on the Elliott. It's just outside of the Elliott, near Loon Lake. And this is the 2008 LiDAR. Let me do something here. Okay. This is the 2008 LiDAR, and you'll notice there's not very good road definition here. I think somebody mentioned something about the importance of road, or Ken mentioned the importance of road definition and seeing the old road system, and that really shows up in the new data. Here are the new data, and you can see this is, I don't even think this is a very active road, but you can see a lot of the skid trails down the face, which would probably never be tractor logged again. They may be some other system, but very steep road systems. So we have real good definition here. We don't have that everywhere, but I want to point out that the bare earth model is real important to get a good bare earth model, because that's the basis that we use to get the vegetation height model, which is so important for our planning purposes, for the landscape scale planning. So because we take the height at the canopy and we subtract the bare earth, and that gives us the vegetation height model, which is so important for us. This is a spot on the Millicoma River a lot of people may be familiar with. I haven't had the chance to visit yet, but I'm looking forward to getting there. So this is 2020 Google Earth photo. And this is the bare earth LiDAR from 2008. You can see a road here, kind of. You kind of see a road here. For me, I'm working on the geomorphology of the streams from my work. It's not, it's certainly better than what we had. I'm not going to complain. I'd rather have the 2008 data than no data at all. But you'll see when we go to the new data, it's just so much better here. And even there's a canopy there. We're still able to get a good bare earth model here. You can see the road. You can see there's a low water crossing here. I can see things, aspects of the stream channel and stream banks that are just remarkable. You can see some of the trails from, I assume this is a recreation site here. So we're getting real good bare earth model. There's always going to be some glitches. The bare earth model is, it's a model, and it depends on classifying the point cloud for what's ground and what's not ground. And there's potential for classification errors. But, and so you can see some little glitches here, but we still get just an excellent model with the new data. This is up Luder Creek. This shows an example of why it's real important to have some new LiDAR data. So this is 2006 imagery, but it was harvested, I think, in probably 2010 or 2011. And here there was a debris torrent that came after harvest, following harvest. There was a large storm event in 2011. But this doesn't show up in the 2008 imagery, which is real important to know what the vegetation's doing. So anyway, that's another big advantage of having a new model, and maybe even more frequent acquisitions, is for change detection. So there's the 2028 photo of Luder Creek. You can see there's been quite a bit of regeneration in the harvest area. And the 2008 data, of course, this was with the vegetation on, And so we don't have a very good ground model here. It's poor resolution. If you can see the triangles that show are really each vertices of these triangles is the point that we have with which to build the ground model. And there's the new data, and you can see it's just so much better. And it actually, you can see the debris torrent track, which you know, I haven't even scratched the surface of looking at understanding what we can do with this for research purposes. This the final set that I have here to show you is Larson Creek. It's in the southwest corner of the forest, and this actually shows some of the limitations that we have with LiDAR still. Is a current photo. Here's the 2008 imagery or LiDAR model, ground earth model, or ground model. You can see the stream. You can see some features of the morphology. From my point of view, for instance, I can see that there's a flat alluvial surface here, but it doesn't show up very well. I'd like to have better. There's the more recent model. It is better, but we're still limited here in our bare earth model by dense vegetation. And this is the importance. We had a discussion of do we fly the do we have a flight while the leaves are on in the summer and get get data right away, or do we do a leaf off flight, which is got some other problems, mainly weather, mainly. February flight would provide a much better ground model. Anyway, we still have a better model, and this is going to be wonderful data to work with. We haven't received from the vendor or from Dagami the actual point cloud data or the canopy height model, so I can't show you the vegetation height, but the vegetation height model. But that's going to be very, very important data going forward with planning. And that's all I have, just a short set of slides to show what we've got and some of the capabilities that we'll have for, this is the landscape scale. This is aerial. This is not the below canopy LiDAR that Bogdan's working with. So there you go. Glad to answer any, I guess, technical questions about that.
Any questions from the group? Comments? I think the intent, in having, I guess, first of all, thank you to Bogdan and Deanne for their willingness to be here today. And I think the hope was to give a tip of the iceberg in terms of the type of information that the OSU team and others that they're going to be working with in FMP development, the type of information, data, and resources that are going to be at their disposal, both in FMP development, obviously, for purposes of this group, but also, I think, wet your whistle also a little bit in terms of the research that opportunities that are going to be there on the forest going forward. Paul.
I just totally kind of off subject, but not. The debris torrent that you showed, did it actually start under the canopy?
That's a good question. Boy, you want to start an argument? That's a good place.
Yeah, no, that's me. I like to start arguments.
I just don't have the data. Yeah, no, and that's actually, that's a subject of what I'm researching, and it's there's an increased probability with harvest, is we know that there's going to be landslides and debris torrents. But in that instance, did that result from the harvest? I really don't know. I don't have the data to show. We could find that out. The event that caused those slides in that area was, I know if you recall, there was a pretty big event in 2011. And, we could look and see if the harvest preceded that, but then you have, you have this issue of causality and what caused the torrent. There's about a 3 times probability, according to the data that I've seen. But that, that depends where you're at. There's a lot of depends.
Those are the questions that we want this forest to answer. My opinion is you see a lot more scars on a bald man's head. So you see more debris flows in a clear cut.
Other comments or questions that don't disparage bald men?
I just want to point out in response to Paul's question too, is this is one of the really great advantages of having a really accurate record, one to start with, that's a full record, right? So that if you do have questions about temporal analysis, if you've got your inventory and you're doing your timing correctly, you can go back in time and really look at more what the conditions were like at the time an event happened. So that's one of the things that's nice about Bogdan's point, that if you have this if you have this comprehensive record, you can go back and mine it for information later on, which is really valuable in a research setting. I also want to tell you, Bogdan had to leave to go teach a class. He wasn't going away for, and I also think that if you look at those images too, you can go back in time and you can look to see if because that's going to come back as an alder stand, most likely. You can go back in time and sample that site and look at, was there a prior slide, and was it an alder track, alder stand back into before harvest, or was it only after? So is it an area prone to sliding and there was a trigger by the harvesting, or is it an area that is just prone to sliding and it slid again? So again, I think Dan's question about cause and effect is a good one. And if, it's a good place too for people to have in-depth inventory and information to help tease out those issues. And just so happens the Elliott is perfectly placed to do that. So it's one of the.
Good. Thanks, Katie, and others. Let me just quickly here as we wrap up. I think Fergus, I want to circle back to earlier. You had a question or a comment you wanted to make to the group, and any other members of the public that wanted to weigh in here. Now would be a good time to be able to do that. And then Shannon, I wondered if after we do that, if you want to have any closing remarks and or sort of observations on kind of what next in terms of the next month or so. What do you anticipate the work being? And I'll have Fergus, if you're still showing as with us, if you want to go off mute, you can. There you are.
Oh, thanks, Peter. Like Paul, I was a little baffled by the complexity of the directing roles. I was just curious about how the OSU is going to spend their $3.5 million over the next year, and how that will transition to the next phase. I believe Vicki said that the work that's done through the end of 22 is background work that needs to be done and is not necessarily decided about going forward. But it seems like there's going to be a difficult transition there, or at least puzzling. It would be very helpful to see a schematic of these managerial roles. And I applaud your OSU's efforts at this difficult task. Thanks.
Thanks, Fergus, and duly noted on this schematic and sort of describing and maybe a bit more specificity on roles and responsibilities. And I think some of that work is underway, and we'll make sure that folks have that information as it's available. So thanks, appreciate it and duly noted. Any other comments or questions from the public audience? All right. Shannon, you want to bring us home, as it were?
Sure, happy to. Well, I just want to thank everyone for your feedback, your comments and your questions today. And as more arise, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to address any questions that we can or put you in touch with the right people and continue to incorporate feedback into this process. As far as kind of our highlights for next steps, we will be working off of that timeline that I showed between now and February. But a couple of key areas that we are moving forward working on are putting together that research plan implementation committee, working on the RFP for Coast Range Forest Management expertise, and then working on that detailed timeline targeting those partial key draft areas for the December 2022 meeting and that engagement plan. And we're planning to have that ready to present to this group, to the full advisory committee at the December 2021 meeting, and having those documents to you ahead of time so that you'll have time to review them and give your input and ask questions.
Thanks, Shannon. And sorry, Barb, I think maybe I saw that you came off mute. You're on the phone.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, just a couple of quick notes. Number one, I believe you need an ecology committee with forest defenders, muralette surveyors, environmental and carbon experts, in addition to your advisory committee. And also, I noted that 10% monitoring plan should be 100% monitoring, because 10% is woefully inadequate to monitor what's going on the ground. And number three, Star Wars technology presentation is fascinating and could be useful in determining large carbon reserves. However, in a native forest, which the Elliott is by 50%, it would interfere with the natural stands, the native stands, which have never been logged. But back in the 1800s, the forest succumbed to fire, and since then, 50% of the forest has not been logged. It is that 50% which contains those native stands, which are separate and totally a working forest and a carbon reserve. So cutting them at no matter what age, with your Star Wars technology, looking at the tree heights and seeing what's what and who's where, is simply hands off in those native stands. That is a separate and totally ecological, solid carbon reserve, and it's a working forest, and it stands alone. And the other last part of my question is, I had a long letter, but I've sent it to you, and I hope you're all getting it. Has anyone contacted NOAA regarding federal funding, as opposed to logging to the tune of $35 million with $700,000 a year? NOAA completely funds the South Slough Estuary Reserve. It is an educational research. Why in the world can we not model that, the Elliott Research Forest Program, after the NOAA program out at South Slough Reserve here in Coos Bay? And there is just absolutely no reason in the world to cut big trees anymore. And boy, you know I'll fight you to the end on that. So, and I have a lot of people in my team, so I'm just hoping that y'all understand. I really, really appreciate your work. I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything everyone is doing. It's phenomenal. But here's the bottom line: you can't cut the native forest stands. You can't take the remaining the remaining pristine pieces that have grown for over 100 years. Anything over 65 now, to that end, must be protected, and everything that's 100, 150, whatever they are in those tree stands, must be left alone, intact, in preservation for all time. And that is our goal. And until we reach that goal, we will not stop. Thank you.
Thanks for your engagement on this, Barb. And
okay.
Tom, as we wrap up, any closing thoughts here? And I would note, Barb, for your reference and for others that might be interested, that I think a lot of the issues you touched on were items that the group worked extensively on and articulated in the research proposals. So there may be some really helpful information there for you as well. And Tom, anything as we wrap up?
I'll just say I'll look forward to seeing Barb's letter, and we can respond, to it specifically. And thanks for the comments today. I maybe just with regard to, I guess, yeah, Fergus is still on. It was just to be clear, the IGA is for 1.8 million. 3.5 describes the project from the 2 years ago forward, and it doesn't take into account all of our in-kind contribution from the university. But just wanted to make that clear, and to say thanks for the comments, Fergus, on the we will provide that clarity on the structure, and I guess there was one other thing I wanted to respond to, and I've forgotten what it is, but just say, I'll just finish with saying thanks for the input today, and we'll get back with details.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks everybody for your engagement. A couple of folks from the advisory committee have texted already saying that they're excited to see the presentations and interact with today's meeting information and provide additional feedback. So we'll keep in touch, and appreciate everybody's time today. The effort of the OSU team in putting together the presentations. Bogdan, please convey our appreciation for his engagement, and have a nice weekend.